Well, while this is getting set up, let me ask how many of you happened to attend last year's I3P workshop? Okay. As part of what I'm going to be going through today, I'm going to probably touch on some things that you might have seen last year, but that's in the way of laying groundwork for bringing in concepts other than availability. Confidentiality, integrity, and availability being the primary three security issues associated with IT security. As Rob said, I'm with the MITRE Corporation. I've been very lucky, I think, to be working on this particular project for the last couple of years. It's been fascinating to approach a way to tease out subtle but important dependencies in an organization, and really interesting problems come into play. Even when you know what's most important to you, how do you handle, as Dave pointed out, the low probability, high impact scenarios? Very good talk. I think that was right on target. Okay. To start off with, we're addressing this particular situation. We all know this. This is not new. PCS networks constantly being more integrated. There are a lot of business efficiencies that can be gained by integrating PCS networks with business networks and internet-facing resources. That means the PCS network must be more robust. And that means that security risk analyses or technical risk analyses are part of establishing that robustness. Now, risk analyses like these are typically done by technologists, people who deal in terms of vulnerabilities, in terms of services. Techno-speak, if you will, that's not necessarily meaningful to the people that have the purse strings, the people that must make the decisions on committing dollars to risk mitigation. They have to view technical security in the larger context of business risk. So therefore, the need exists for a process for assessing PCS network risk and then translating it into terms meaningful to corporate level officers. So that's the nub of what we are addressing, and graphically we like to show it this way. In your organization, you've got a number of business or mission objectives. You've also got an IT infrastructure that supports the achievement of those objectives. But if you have a risk down here, how does that translate into a risk up there? The way we approach the problem is this. We'll decompose these mission objectives into the tasks that must be done to achieve those objectives and where are the dependencies, specific dependencies. And the heavy lines here indicate more critical dependencies than maybe the lighter ones. The key here is to be specific, to be precise, and to be accurate. The next level down, we talk in terms of what are the information assets, as we call them, that are needed to do these tasks. Maybe it's a lab result. Maybe it's a sensor output. Maybe it's an actuator command needed to do a task. And again, where are the specific dependencies? What would happen if you took one of these away? And again, the heavier lines here indicate critical dependencies. And then finally, we associate the information assets with the elements here that would be subject to attack, the information or the IT infrastructure. If a node, a network node, is associated with an IT asset, it could be involved in producing it, in transporting it, in storing it, presenting it, in any way, shape, or form. If there's an association, then what we say is a risk at that node will travel right up the paths of dependency and be imposed on the supported information needed to do the tasks, needed to achieve the mission. Now, as indicated here, you might have a node at high risk of exploitation. What does that mean to the organization? Well, if it's not incredibly critical to providing the information to do a task needed for mission, maybe all that risk will not propagate all the way up to the top. Then again, if the high risk were over here, if this node were critical to providing information for a task that's also critical to mission, you may have a problem. And this can be subtle. Not all these dependencies are evident at the surface. So we have this process that we call risk map, the risk to mission assessment process. And we apply it to this problem in a way that effectively models key features of an organization. We capture what are the mission objectives, what are the specific dependencies all the way down. We draw upon several established methodologies. Analytic hierarchy process at the top level, and then at the task, information, and node level, we use quality function deployment, or QFD. And we have the benefit from this of capturing the priorities from the top down to the bottom. Once we have this model, then we use the same set of dependencies to establish a set of roll-up rules, where if we associate a risk with a node at the bottom, we use the roll-up rules to determine just how much of this risk is going to propagate up to the top. That provides then solid, credible, understandable support for decisions at the executive level for risk mitigation. It is a prototype. It's implemented in Microsoft Excel, and it's a number of worksheets that we use, first of all, to establish what are the mission objectives, what are the differences in priorities. This is where we use the analytical hierarchy process. And we get from that a weighted list of business objectives. That is the input for matrix number 2, which is where we start relating operational tasks to business objectives. From that, we get a weighted list of tasks, and then we continue on down the line to relate those to information assets to network nodes. And at the end of the day, we have what we call a business model, top to bottom dependencies, and we have an idea of which are the most critical nodes. Now that can go into what is normally done today, a network risk assessment, where now we associate a level of risk, high, medium, or low, simply qualitative risk, associate risk with each node. We don't try to do a multiplication or anything fancy combinatorially. We simply associate risk as an attribute of a node. And then we go backwards through the model. We associate two items. How critical is a node? How much at risk is the node? Criticality comes from the business model. Risk level comes from the network risk assessment, and we get asset risk. And then iteratively, we go right back up the model to develop task risk and mission risk. And the nice thing is, you can do some what-if exercises with this, where if you put in a mitigator down here, in the way of a patch, maybe a little, even as much as re-architecting or redesign, if you see the changes that you can make at the bottom level of the model, those propagate in terms of reduced risk all the way to the top. And you can get an idea of when you have done enough to reduce mission risk to an acceptable level. This is kind of what that looks like. This is what we call our dashboard view, and this will be visible in the demo far better than this at the screen here, but the idea is here. You've got a workspace for viewing all of your nodes, all the vulnerabilities you're considering, and the resulting risk at the node level, risk of exploitation. What you have here are the information assets that are supported. The blue bars are the relative weights. The red bars are the associated risks. And then again, the imposed risk on task and on mission. And as you apply a mitigation, you can see the changes propagate right through the model, as I described. When you make changes down at this level, then the reduced risks, hopefully enough reduction in risk, shows up throughout the model. Now, this has been under development for a couple of years. We have got, that still didn't work in terms of redoing the tabs. Anyway, behind the icons are the names of these individuals. Two firms have licensed the technology to do their own independent development of tools incorporating the methodology. Matricon Incorporated, who provides security services to the energy sector, and also NMR Consulting. Both of these companies are doing their own independent development. We're not really associated with them other than to have provided the technology. Additional licensing opportunities are available through our tech transfer office. Debbie Davis is the contact at MITRE. Now, to get to the point where we are today, we're broadening the analytical base. In the past few years, we've been all about looking at integrity and availability. Information about the process control system has to be available now for the operator. It has to be available correctly. So that's been the primary focus of the analysis to date. However, we feel that confidentiality issues do, in fact, lurk behind the scenes in terms of process control system settings, lab results, operational data. This is significant intellectual capital that any owner-operator should consider in terms of protecting it from harmful disclosure. We foresee future uses of risk map in other sectors where confidentiality is of equal or greater importance, such as medical, law enforcement. We're talking about HIPAA regulations, privacy considerations, law enforcement investigative situations, and especially financial sectors. Again, confidentiality is a significant player here. So how are we going to do that? We're going to extend the current model to capture confidentiality-based dependencies. Up till now, the model has looked like this. You've got an objective A that depends on task J being done. Task J needs info asset M, which is associated with a network node key. All this has been about availability. Now we're going to add parallel paths, where to do task J, maybe you need to make sure that the information asset is also non-corrupted, probably the case already today, as well as being available and maybe also being confidential. And those dependencies will continue down the line, where now we're no longer simply talking about network nodes, now we're talking about communications links, because as we all know, data can be exfiltrated on a comm link just as easily as from a node. So that's the way the model is being expanded. I'd invite you to get a little more information about this, and certainly as you think about coming to the demonstration next door, think about your own business situation. What are your dependencies at each level? Mission to task, task to information, information to network. And what might you put into a risk map model on your own? It gives you a good, solid way of thinking about your own dependencies, even if you don't use the tool. Also, think about what disclosure of your PCS settings might mean. And other proprietary information. Does that give away your competitive advantage? Does it give you the same insight the attackers had when they knew which 8 cables to clip? Does it give somebody a roadmap to become a safety issue at your facility? And by all means, for additional information, come and see the demonstration. Let's talk further about wrapping confidentiality into the picture. And our methodology is already posted on the I3P website, but at the close of this project year, we're going to update our report to include the addition of confidentiality. I believe that is the last slide.
Can you see that slide up?
Certainly.
First, let's thank our speakers. Comment that this looks like